I want to tell you about the suitcase first, because the suitcase is the whole joke of it, and I am finally at a place where I can laugh at the joke. One suitcase. Medium-sized. The kind you can put in the overhead bin if you angle it correctly, and the person behind you in the boarding queue is not watching you do it. Packed for 2 weeks. Summer clothes because I had Googled the climate, and the internet had been honest with me about the heat. 7 shirts, 2 pairs of lightweight pants, 1 pair of shorts that I had not worn since a vacation in 2019 that I had not particularly enjoyed, toiletries in a clear bag the size requirements demanded, a paperback I had been meaning to finish for 4 months, my medications in their original bottles, because I had read somewhere that customs officials appreciate the original bottles, and a small folder with my travel insurance documents and the name and address of the hotel I had booked in Dumaguete for 14 nights. 14 nights. The folder said 14 nights. I read that folder the day I left, and it said 14 nights. And I believed it completely, because I am a man who has spent 65 years believing what folders say. That suitcase is in my closet now, in an apartment in Dumaguete on the island of Negros in the Philippines. The apartment I have been living in for 2 years and 4 months. The suitcase that came for 2 weeks is surrounded now by the accumulated objects of an actual life. A coffee maker I bought in month 3, books from the second-hand shop near the university that I visit every Saturday, a wooden chess set that a neighbor carved and sold me for a price I tried to increase and he refused, 2 additional pairs of shorts, because the one pair was optimistic, and a small terracotta pot with a plant in it that I did not purchase and did not ask for, and which simply appeared on my windowsill one morning from a direction I understand but will get to. The folder that said 14 nights is in the kitchen drawer. I kept it. I keep it the way you keep something that was wrong, in a direction that turned out to be the best direction anything has ever been wrong in. Let me back up. Because a man who comes for 2 weeks and stays for 2 years and 4 months did not arrive empty. He arrived full of something, and the something is the reason the staying made sense. My name is Alexander. I am 67 now, which means I was 65 when I landed, which is the age the title says. And I want to be precise about ages, because this story is about what 65 can look like when you stop letting 65 make the decisions for you. I grew up in Connecticut. The kind of Connecticut that exists in the imagination of people who have never been to Connecticut, which is to say, old houses and old money, and the specific social architecture of a place that has been deciding who belongs and who doesn't for 300 years, and has gotten very smooth at it. I was neither old money nor old house. My father ran a hardware store in Bridgeport that he had inherited from his father, and that he ran until the neighborhood changed around it, in ways that the hardware store could not survive. And then he did something I watched as a child, with the specific attention that children pay to the moments when their parents' dignity is tested. He closed the store without complaint. He found work. He found more work. He kept going. He was not a man of large emotions or large statements. He was a man of continuous motion in the direction of whatever needed doing next. I took this from him, the continuous motion, the forward-facing posture, the belief that the correct response to a closed door was to locate the next door and open it. I took it, and I applied it to a career in insurance underwriting that lasted 38 years, and that I was good at, in the way that people who have inherited their father's forward-facing posture are good at things. Steadily, reliably, without drama, compounding slowly in the right direction. I was married to a woman named Patricia for 26 years. She was a landscape architect with strong opinions about native plants, and a laugh that arrived without warning and stayed longer than you expected. We divorced in 2014. Not badly. We did not do it badly. We sat across a table from a mediator over 3 sessions and divided the architecture of 26 years with the care that people apply to things they respect even when they are ending them. She has a garden now in Vermont that, from the photographs she sends at Christmas, appears to be exactly the garden she always described when we were married. I am glad for her. I say that without the performance of magnanimity, because it is simply true. I had a daughter, Sophie, from a brief relationship before Patricia. Sophie is 38, lives in Portland, Oregon, is a ceramicist whose work I find genuinely beautiful, and which I say without the performance of parental obligation, because I actually find it beautiful. Sophie and I had the specific relationship of a father and a daughter who found each other later than they should have, and who made it work with the effort that late-found things require, and the appreciation for the effort that both people feel when they know what not having it looked like. I retired at 65. The company had a retirement package tied to the anniversary year, and 65 was the year, and I took it because my body had been sending memos about the commute, and the fluorescent lighting, and the ergonomic chair that was neither for some time, and I had been ignoring the memos in the way that people ignore memos about things they are not ready to address. When I was ready, I addressed it. I signed the papers in January. I cleaned out the desk. A colleague named Frank, who I had worked beside for 19 years, shook my hand and said, "Alexander, I genuinely cannot picture what you're going to do with yourself." He meant it warmly. He was also correct. I could not picture it either. The apartment in Hartford that I had lived in for 8 years since the divorce was the kind of apartment that functions well as a base of operations and poorly as a life. It had good light in the morning and a decent kitchen and a parking space I rarely needed, and walls that I had never gotten around to putting anything on, because putting things on walls implied a permanence of intention that I had been deferring since 2014. I was 65 years old and my walls were bare, and my retirement was starting, and I had, outside of Sophie's calls every Sunday and the occasional dinner with Frank and his wife, and the Saturday mornings I spent at the farmer's market buying vegetables I mostly used correctly, nothing I would describe as a structure. The idea of the Philippines came from an unlikely source. It came from a crossword puzzle. I want to say that plainly, and without embarrassment, because the mechanism of how an idea enters your life is less important than what you do with it after. I was doing the Sunday crossword, which had been my Sunday ritual since the divorce, sitting with coffee and the paper version of the puzzle that I bought at a pharmacy, specifically because the paper version requires a pen, and a pen in hand is a different engagement than a screen. And the clue was something about the longest Christmas season in the world, and the answer was Philippines, and I wrote it in, and then I stopped. I had a specific memory. 15 years earlier, maybe 16, a colleague who had retired before me had come back from a trip to the Philippines and had said something in a meeting, said it the way people say things in meetings that are not about the meeting, the offhand aside that carries more weight than the agenda. He had said, "I went to a place called Dumaguete, and I think I left something there that I didn't know I was carrying." Nobody had asked him to elaborate because it was a meeting, and meetings are not places where you elaborate on things you left in Dumaguete. But I had written the name in the margin of my notepad. Dumaguete. I had written it down 16 years ago in the margin of a meeting notepad, and then forgotten it until a crossword clue about Christmas put it back in front of me on a Sunday morning in January in an apartment with bare walls. I Googled it that afternoon. I spent 3 Sundays reading about it. Not the travel brochure version, the version where every place is described with the same vocabulary of stunning and breathtaking and paradise, until the words have been emptied of all specific meaning. I read the blogs, the forums, the accounts of people who had been there and had written about it without the vocabulary of tourism, which is to say, with the specificity of people who were trying to describe an actual experience rather than sell a destination. What I read was consistent in ways that the consistency made credible. A university city, English widely spoken, a long seawall boulevard where the whole city walked in the evenings. mountains behind, and sea in front, and a pace that people described without exception in the same language, which was the language of something that had been lost elsewhere and found there. A pace that gave you back something the modern world had been taking a small amount of every year without asking, and that you had not noticed was gone until you were somewhere it wasn't being taken. I booked 2 weeks. I bought the one suitcase. I told Sophie because Sophie needed to know, and she said, "Dad, that sounds great. How long are you going for?" I said 2 weeks. She said, "Just 2 weeks?" I said I was 65, and I did not know the place, and 2 weeks seemed reasonable. She said, "Okay." She said it with the tone of someone who is not going to argue with a plan they suspect will evolve. She was not wrong. Let me tell you about the landing. The actual physical experience of arriving in Dumaguete for the first time, without the retrospective softening that memory applies to things once you know how they turned out. I want to give you the unedited arrival, because the edited version, the one that starts with the beauty and the warmth and the boulevard at sunset, that version is true, but it is not the first version. The first version is more complicated and more honest and more useful. The plane from Manila was small, smaller than I had expected. A propeller aircraft that held perhaps 50 people and that flew low enough over the island that you could see the individual fields below and the roads winding between them and the coast appearing and the city appearing along it. I pressed my face to the window the way I had not pressed my face to an airplane window since I was a child, and I saw a city at the edge of a sea with mountains directly behind it, green and definite, the mountains as close as mountains get to a city, practically leaning over it, and I thought, Alexander, whatever you expected, it is not this. The airport was the smallest I had used in 30 years of occasional travel. It had the quality of an airport that knows what it is and has decided that what it is sufficient. One arrival's door, one baggage belt, one exit. A man outside the exit was holding a sign with my name spelled correctly. His name was Lito, and he was 30-something and drove a van for the hotel and had the particular quality of someone who had been collecting confused foreigners from that airport for years and had developed an efficient and kindly method for it. He took my suitcase without being asked. He said, "First time in Dumaguete, sir?" I said yes. He said, "You will like it. Very peaceful. Good people." He said it with a straightforwardness that was not the promotional enthusiasm of someone who works in hospitality and has a script. He said it the way you tell someone something true. The drive to the hotel was 15 minutes. I want to tell you what I looked at for those 15 minutes, because what I looked at is the clue to everything. I looked at the street, not at my phone. I had been on planes for 20 hours, and there had been screens for most of that time, and I was done with screens, and I sat in the back of Lito's van, and I looked out the window at a city going about its business in the middle of an afternoon, and I felt something that I could not immediately name. I named it later that evening, when I was sitting on the hotel's small balcony with a cold water and the sound of the boulevard below me. I had felt, for 15 minutes in the back of a van, absolutely no impulse to be anywhere other than where I was. I want to explain why that is remarkable. I am a man who has spent his adult life partially somewhere else. This is not a criticism of my adult life. It is an observation about the quality of attention I have brought to most of it. In Hartford, at my desk, at dinner with Frank and his wife, at the farmer's market, I was present in the technical sense, and partially elsewhere in the practical sense. Planning the next thing, processing the previous thing, carrying the work, or the worry, or the ambient noise of a man who has trained himself to treat the present moment as a transit point between a past he is still managing and a future he is trying to arrange. In the back of Lito's van in Dumaguete, in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, I was just there, looking at the street, a tricycle, a woman with a basket of something on her head, children in school uniforms, an old man on a plastic chair outside a small shop, a dog investigating something near a wall, entirely there, as if the 20-hour journey had been a gradual decompression and the van was the last stage of it, and I had arrived, finally, at surface pressure. The hotel was clean and simple. The room had a ceiling fan and a window that overlooked a side street and a bathroom with a shower head whose water pressure was enthusiastic in ways I had not expected. I unpacked the one suitcase, which took 12 minutes because I am a precise packer, and I went out to find food. The boulevard was 5 minutes from the hotel on foot. I want to tell you about the boulevard in the early evening of a Wednesday, because it is the thing I try to describe to people, and that I always fail to describe completely. It is a long seawall, concrete, along the water. The sea is on one side, and the city is on the other. The mountains are behind the city and visible over the roofline, very close. The kind of close that makes you feel the city is held by them rather than simply adjacent. At 5 in the afternoon in Dumaguete, everyone is on the boulevard. That is not an exaggeration. Families, couples, groups of young people, old men sitting in the specific configuration of old men who have been sitting in that same configuration for 20 years. Children on bicycles, threatening each other's stability. Food carts. A man selling something fried on sticks. Another selling green mango with something pink I did not know what to do with yet. And everyone was walking. Not the purposeful walking of people who are going somewhere. The slow, circling, no destination walking of people who are simply present in an evening that deserves to be present in. I joined it. I did not plan to join it. I was looking for a restaurant, and instead, I joined the walking. I walked slowly because the pace of the boulevard made any other pace feel aggressive. I walked for 40 minutes, and then I found a small open-sided restaurant and sat at a table facing the water and ordered something by pointing at a photograph on a laminated menu and received a bowl of sinigang, sour tamarind soup with fish, that I ate slowly in the particular way that you eat something when your whole body has been traveling for 20 hours and has finally stopped and needs to be reminded of what stillness feels like. I went back to the hotel at 8. I sat on the balcony. I could hear the boulevard below, the sound of a city in the evening that is not the sound of nightlife, not the aggressive sound of a place trying to entertain you, the ordinary sound of people, living, in proximity to each other, without the insulation that American cities install between people as a matter of design. I thought, I am here for 13 more days. And for the first time in a long time, 13 more days felt like not enough, rather than the usual calculation of how many of the days I would be doing things I wanted to do, and how many I would be doing things I had scheduled, because having scheduled things felt more organized than not having them. 13 days felt like not enough. That was the first signal. I registered it and went to sleep. I want to tell you about the next 2 weeks honestly, because they were not a continuous revelation. There were days that were difficult, in the practical ways that being somewhere new is difficult. The heat was more serious than my one pair of shorts was equipped for, and I bought 2 more pairs from a small shop near the market, at prices that made me check the arithmetic twice, because the arithmetic seemed too favorable. I got briefly and thoroughly lost on the 3rd day following a map application that had opinions about the layout of Dumaguete that the actual layout of Dumaguete did not share. The food required calibration because my stomach, at 65, is not the stomach of a man who grew up eating fermented shrimp paste, and the calibration took a few days and some specific decisions about which things to approach and in what order. And I was alone in the way that you are alone, when you are somewhere for 2 weeks and you know no one. And the knowing no one, which had been the quiet condition of my life in Hartford, felt different here. Not worse, different. In Hartford alone was the ambient state, unremarkable, just the temperature of the room. Here alone had a different texture, because the place around me was so evidently not alone, so structured around the presence of people with each other, that my solitude was visible to me in a way it had not been in an apartment with bare walls where alone was just the furniture. The thing that began to change the texture was the boulevard. I went every evening. It was not a decision after the first time. It was a gravity. The boulevard at 5 in the afternoon in Dumaguete is the thing that happened instead of dinner, and instead of the news, and instead of whatever screen I had been using in Hartford to make the evenings feel managed. I went and I walked and I watched, and slowly, over the first week, I became a recognizable presence in a small part of it. There was a section near the middle of the boulevard where a group of older men had a habitual gathering. Plastic chairs arranged in the specific configuration of a group that has been meeting in the same place for a long time, and has stopped needing to arrange the chairs because the chairs know where they go. They played chess sometimes. They talked mostly. They watched the water and the passers-by, and each other, with the ease of people who have been watching each other for years and have stopped needing to perform anything for the watching. They noticed me by the third evening. Not intrusively. I was a foreigner on a boulevard where foreigners were not unusual, and the noticing was quiet. A glance, a nod on the fourth evening when I passed. By the fifth evening, one of them said, in English that was deliberate and clear, "You walk every day." It was an observation, not a question. I said yes. He said, "Good. The walking is good for the thinking." He said it with the authority of someone who had tested the hypothesis personally for many years. His name was Mang Bert. He was 71. He had been a school principal for 30 years and had the posture of someone who has stood in front of rooms of people for 3 decades and whose posture has permanently encoded the expectation of being heard. He made room in the arrangement of plastic chairs, not conspicuously, just slightly. A space that I was welcome to occupy if I chose to, and that would not be mentioned if I didn't. I occupied it.